under the wide breadth of a white winter sky, where the earth had turned to glass and wind cut like knives, a figure moved slowly through the storm. Her name was Dana, 24, a widow of 2 harsh winters. Her shawl little more than a whisper against the cold. The snow came sideways, fierce and endless, blotting out the world. Behind her, the trail was gone, swallowed by the night. Her wagon had broken miles back, the mule long fled. She had kept walking, one step at a time, because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant dying. But now her legs trembled, her breath turned shallow, and the world began to dim into silence. She fell to her knees beside a half-buried fence post, fingers too numb to hold her locket. Inside it was a photograph, her late husband in uniform, the edges smudged by tears. She'd followed his memory farther than she should have, believing there was a town beyond the ridge, a place to start again. There was nothing but snow. Her lips moved in prayer, not for rescue, but for peace. The storm was a giant hand, brushing her into sleep. Her eyes fluttered closed. Then came a sound that did not belong to the wind. Hoofbeats, slow, steady, certain. The horse appeared first, a dark blur against the white. The rider sat tall, coat flapping, hat pulled low. When he dismounted, the storm seemed to pause, curious. He knelt beside her, without a word, gloved fingers pressing lightly to her neck. A pulse, faint but there. His name was Darrell, 34, a rancher from the northern plains, a man who spoke little but saw everything. He had been riding back from a neighboring town, bringing supplies before the storm closed the world. He'd seen the broken wagon, followed the tracks, and found her lying like a ghost in the snow. He brushed the ice from her cheek. Her eyes flickered open, dull gray against the frost. She whispered something. He could barely hear it. "Don't leave me." The words vanished into the wind. He wrapped his heavy coat around her shoulders, felt the fragile weight of her leaning into him. "You're safe," he murmured, voice rough, almost unsure, as if the words had not left his mouth in years. Then he lifted her easily, set her before him on the horse, and turned toward home. The blizzard swallowed them whole. The ride was slow, blind. Snow lashed their faces, the world spinning white. Darrell's arms stayed firm around her, his coat covering them both. She shivered against his chest, half awake, muttering pieces of dreams, names, apologies, prayers. Once she said, "He said he'd come back. He never did." Darrell didn't ask who she meant. He only tightened his hold, letting his warmth speak for him. The rhythm of the horse's hooves kept time with her heartbeat, faint but steadying. Each mile felt like eternity. By the time the lights of his cabin appeared through the storm, she had gone limp against him, her breath shallow but alive. He carried her inside, kicked the door shut, and laid her by the fire. The cabin was simple. One room, wooden walls lined with tools, a table scarred by years of work. He stripped off his gloves, then her wet boots, covered her with blankets, and fed the fire until it roared. Steam rose from her hair. He sat beside her, silent, watching color slowly return to her cheeks. When she stirred again, he pressed a warm cloth to her lips. She drank weakly, eyes flicking open to the dim lamplight. "You're safe," he said again, softer this time. She looked at him, disoriented, her voice a faint rasp. Why'd you stop?" He shrugged, eyes lowering to the floorboards. Would have been wrong not to. That was all he said. That was all he needed to say. By morning, the storm had passed. The world outside glittered under the sun, endless white stretching in every direction. Dana woke to the smell of wood smoke and stew. The man who'd saved her was at the stove, sleeves rolled up, movements quiet, deliberate. He looked younger in daylight, though his eyes told of miles walked alone. She sat up, pulling the blanket close, embarrassed by her weakness. He noticed, set down the spoon, and brought her a bowl. "Eat slow," he said. "You'll feel steadier." She tried to thank him, but her throat tightened. The words came out broken. "You didn't have to," he shook his head. "Ma'am, out here we all have to. Otherwise, none of us make it." She met his gaze then, steady, unguarded, and felt something strange stir within her chest, something that had been dead for too long. Trust. As the days passed, the snow outside deepened before it began to melt. She stayed, too weak to travel, helping where she could, folding linens, cleaning tools, mending a torn saddle strap. Darryl never stopped her, never asked questions. He simply shared space with her, the silence between them filled with small kindnesses. He would leave before dawn to tend the horses, and when he returned, she'd have the fire waiting. Sometimes they shared coffee on the porch, watching the pale sun climb the horizon. The world felt slower then, softer. She began to smile again, a rare, quiet thing that made him glance away, so she wouldn't see his own. One evening, an old neighbor named Mrs. Tilly stopped by with supplies. She was a brisk, kind woman with a sharp tongue. "You picked up a stray, I see," she said to Darryl, teasing. "She'll need care if she's to get her strength back." Dana blushed. Darryl only nodded. "She's been through enough," he said simply. When Mrs. Tilly left, the cabin felt smaller, the fire warmer. Dana watched him repair a lantern by the table, his rough hand steady, the light catching the lines around his eyes. "You live alone?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Most days." She hesitated. "A wife?" His hand stilled. "Used to be. Fever took her years ago." He didn't look up, but his voice carried the weight of quiet years. She wanted to say she was sorry, but the words seemed too small. Instead, she placed the mended saddle strap beside him and whispered, "You keep fixing things, even the broken ones." He looked at her then, and for the first time she saw warmth behind the reserve. Only when they're worth the effort. Spring came slow but sure. The snow receded, the earth breathing again. The river by the ridge began to move, breaking through its icy shell. Dana found herself laughing one afternoon as a foal stumbled near the fence. The sound startled her. It had been years since laughter had lived in her throat. Darryl turned from the stable, smiling faintly at the sound. "That's better than any medicine," he said. She brushed a strand of hair from her face, grinning. "Didn't think I remembered how." He walked closer, sunlight on his shoulders, voice low. "Seems you just needed the right reason." That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, looking out at the thawing fields. The coat he'd wrapped her in hung by the door, worn but strong. She touched it lightly, remembering the warmth, the heartbeat behind her when the world was nothing but wind and dark. The memory made her chest ache. She realized she didn't want to leave, not yet, maybe not ever. But the thought frightened her. She had loved once before, lost everything, learned that the world could turn cruel in a heartbeat. Could she risk it again? Outside, the moon rode high, silvering the plains. She stepped onto the porch, pulling the coat around her shoulders. The air was cool, gentle now. Darryl was already there, sitting on the steps, looking toward the horizon. He turned when she joined him, eyes reflecting the moonlight. For a long time, neither spoke. The night was too quiet, too full. Then he said softly, "You ever wonder why storms come?" She tilted her head. "To break us." He shook his head. "Maybe to show us who's left when they're over." She looked away, heart trembling. "You think I'll find where I belong?" He studied her, then answered, "Maybe you already did." His voice was calm, certain, and it undid her. All the strength she'd been holding, all the walls she'd built, they cracked. Tears spilled without warning. "I was ready to die that night," she whispered. "I thought no one would even find me." He moved closer, not touching her yet, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. "You were found," he said gently, "and you're still here." She turned toward him, eyes glistening. "You saved me." He shook his head slowly. "No, Dana. I just showed up. You did the rest." The words struck her deeper than she expected. The wind stirred, carrying the smell of rain and earth, new beginnings. He reached for her hand then, hesitant but sure, his fingers rough and warm. "I thought I was saving you," he said quietly. "But truth is, you're the one who saved me. I'd stopped feeling anything out here. You brought the world back." She looked at him through tears, unable to speak. The world felt too full for words. Instead, she let her hand tighten around his. The silence between them was not empty. It was alive, humming with all the things that didn't need to be said. When she finally found her voice, it trembled. "Darryl, you gave me back the world." He smiled faintly, a man who rarely did. Then it was worth the ride through every storm. The wind lifted the edges of his coat, wrapping them closer together. They sat that way for a long time, watching the stars burn bright above the plains. Somewhere an owl called. The world felt endless again, full of promise instead of pain. The storm that had brought her to the edge had carried her straight into safety, into something like love. In that quiet night, beneath a sky too wide for sorrow, two hearts thawed together. And for the first time since death had taken everything from her, Dana believed that life, fragile, stubborn, miraculous, had found her again.